Tavian Ashcroft, 41-year-old Chief Executive Officer of Ashcroft Meridian Group, dropped the leather portfolio onto the kitchen island like it weighed nothing. Like the 22 years of marriage sitting across from him weighed nothing either. "Sign it," he said. Neva Ashcroft, 38-year-old director of the Meridian Community Health Initiative and wife of Tavian, looked at the portfolio without touching it. The kitchen smelled like the coffee she'd made for him that morning, the same dark roast she'd been buying since they were broke and sharing a one-bedroom in Baltimore. She didn't reach for the portfolio. "What is it?" she asked. "Asset transfer. Restructuring. Legal says it needs your signature for end of quarter." She looked at him then. Really looked. He was already in his coat, already looking past her toward the garage door, already somewhere else. He had been somewhere else for about 8 months, she'd counted. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. "I'll have my attorney look at it," she said. Tavian's jaw tightened. "It's internal paperwork, Neva. Not everything requires an attorney. Everything with my name on it does." He left without kissing her goodbye. She hadn't expected him to. She found the document that evening. Not the one he'd left on the island. She hadn't touched that one, but a different one. An older one, buried in the household filing drawer between their 2019 tax return and the warranty card for a refrigerator they'd replaced 2 years ago. She'd been looking for the deed to the lake house because the property tax notice had come in and the address listed didn't match the county records she'd pulled online. A small thing. The kind of thing she used to handle quietly, without bothering anyone, without making it into a situation. The document she found wasn't the deed. It was a corporate filing. Ashcroft Meridian Group subsidiary registration. A holding company she'd never heard of. Linden and Wayfield Partners, LLC, registered 18 months ago in Delaware with a registered agent address in Wilmington and 2 listed principals. Tavian's name was one of them. The other was Juno Caldwell. Neva sat down on the kitchen floor with the filing in her hands, not because her legs gave out, because the floor was the nearest solid thing and she needed something that wasn't going to move. She knew who Juno Caldwell was. Everybody at the company did. Juno was 32, Senior Director of Business Development. The one with the laugh that carried across 3 floors of open office. The one who presented at the Q3 investor meeting in a red blazer and made the board members sit up straighter. Tavian had hired her personally. He'd mentioned her name exactly 5 times at home before Neva stopped counting. After the 5th time, she just filed the name away quietly in the back of her mind, the way she filed everything. Methodically, without drama, waiting to see what it meant. Now she knew what it meant. She sat on the floor for 11 minutes. She knew because the microwave clock read 7:43 when she sat down and 7:54 when she stood back up, the filing on the counter, and went to make herself a cup of tea. The thing people don't understand about women like Neva is that the calm isn't weakness. It isn't numbness either. It's something else. A kind of discipline that comes from years of being the only person in the room keeping track of everything. Every number, every name, every date. When you've spent 22 years managing a household, a non-profit's operating budget, a board of 12, and a husband who believed the world ran itself, you learn that emotions are expensive. You spend them carefully. You wait. She waited. She did not confront Tavian. She did not call her sister. She did not cry in the car or stop eating or stop sleeping. What she did was open her laptop and start pulling public records. Linden and Wayfield Partners, LLC, had been registered 18 months ago. It had filed 2 operating agreements, both redacted in the public version. It had received 2 wire transfers from an account she traced back to Ashcroft Meridian's infrastructure capital line, money allocated for a data center expansion in Charlotte that, as far as Neva knew, had broken ground 14 months ago and was on schedule. She pulled the construction permits for the Charlotte site. The permits were real. The timeline was real. But the contractor of record wasn't the firm Tavian had named in the board presentation last spring. It was a company called Brentwood Hale Contractors, incorporated in Georgia 8 months before the permits were filed. She looked up Brentwood Hale. The registered agent was a law firm in Savannah. The listed principals were 2 names she didn't recognize. She searched both names separately, cross-referencing with Georgia Secretary of State records, LinkedIn, property records, everything she knew how to find, which was more than most people expected. One of the names showed up in a 2021 business filing as a co-registrant with Juno Caldwell. Neva set down her tea. The numbers weren't adding up because they weren't supposed to add up. Someone had designed them not to. Routed capital through subsidiaries, buried the contractor connection behind 2 layers of corporate registration, kept it just complicated enough that a casual review wouldn't catch it. Not invisible, just inconvenient to find. The thing about Neva was that she didn't find inconvenience inconvenient. She found it interesting. She spent the next 3 weeks building a timeline. She used the household computer, not her work machine, not her phone. She kept a paper ledger, the old-fashioned kind, the blue and white composition notebook she'd bought at a CVS near the Health Initiative's offices. She wrote in pencil so she could correct mistakes cleanly. No cloud storage, no emails, nothing that moved through a server she didn't control. The picture she assembled was not complicated, once you could see it whole. Tavian had been diverting capital from Ashcroft Meridian for at least 26 months. The diversions ran through Linden and Wayfield, then through Brentwood Hale, then through a third entity, a real estate holding company in Tennessee called the Grover Pell Group. Before landing in an account, she traced to an offshore structure in the Cayman Islands. The amounts varied. 112,000 here, 400,000 there, one transfer of just under 1 million that had been logged in the company's books as an executive technology procurement expense. There was no technology. She checked. She knew 2 people on the IT infrastructure team, had known them since the company's early days, when she used to bring dinner to the office during late builds. She called one of them, casually, asking about the system refresh she'd heard about, and the woman told her cheerfully that the only major tech spend in the past 2 years had been the server farm in Charlotte, which everyone knew about. Neva thanked her and ended the call. She went back to her ledger. The total she could document conservatively was $4.3 million. That was the conservative number. The real number was higher. She could feel the shape of it even where she couldn't yet prove the edges. She wrote the conservative figure in the middle of a blank page in her blue composition notebook. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned the page and started writing down names. Tavian came home late on a Thursday. She'd made dinner anyway, the way she always did. He ate standing at the island, scrolling his phone, and she watched him from across the kitchen and thought about how she had learned to read his silences, the way a pilot reads instrument panels. This silence was the distracted kind, not the guilty kind. He didn't know she'd been looking. That was important. Meridian Board meets next month, she said. I know. He didn't look up. The infrastructure committee asked me about the Charlotte contractor timeline. I told them I'd follow up. Now he looked up, just slightly. A small adjustment in his posture, barely perceptible. She'd been watching for it. Why would they ask you? Because I'm on the board oversight committee. I told you about this in February, right? He looked back at his phone. I'll handle it. You don't need to get into the weeds, she nodded. She cleared his plate when he was done. She washed the dish by hand, the way she always did for the good plates, and she thought, he still doesn't know. That was the last piece she'd needed to confirm. The question Neva had been turning over for 3 weeks was not what to do. She'd known what to do since the second week. The question was who to tell first. She didn't go to the company's general counsel. Tavian had appointed him. She didn't go to the CFO, who was Tavian's college roommate and had been at every holiday dinner for 15 years. She didn't go to HR. She went to Ottiline Ferris. Ottiline Ferris was 67 years old, had served on the Ashcroft Meridian board for 11 years, and was widely understood to be the sharpest person in any room she entered, usually while giving the impression of a grandmother who baked. She had been on the board before Tavian became CEO. She had voted to elevate him, and she had never once acted like he owed her anything for it, which was partly why Neva trusted her. They met for coffee at a place in Georgetown that Ottiline liked. Small, cash-only, no open Wi-Fi network. Neva had chosen the location herself. She put the composition notebook on the table. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping. Ottiline asked 3 questions the entire time, each one precise, none of them emotional. When Neva finished, Ottiline picked up the notebook, flipped through it, set it back down. How long have you been running this? Ottiline asked. 3 weeks of documentation. I'd been watching for longer. How much does he know you know? Nothing. Ottiline picked up her coffee. Do you have a personal attorney? I've already retained one, separate from any firm the company uses. Ottiline looked at her over the rim of the cup with an expression Neva couldn't quite name. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. What do you want the outcome to be? Ottiline asked. Neva had thought about this question more than any other. She'd turned it over at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. During the long quiet of early morning drives to the initiative's offices, in the 11 minutes she'd sat on the kitchen floor and counted the seconds, passing on the microwave clock. I want the company protected, she said. The employees, the shareholders, the board, in that order. Ottiline nodded slowly. And Tavian. Tavian made his choice. What came next took 6 weeks and happened quietly, the way the most significant things always happen, out of sight, piece by piece, until the moment when it isn't quiet anymore. Ottiline convened a special audit committee. She did it through the governance procedures that Tavian himself had codified in the company charter 4 years ago, which meant he couldn't challenge the process without exposing why he wanted to challenge it. The audit was framed as a routine pre-annual review risk assessment. Two forensic accountants from an outside firm Ottoline had used before were brought in under a confidentiality agreement. Neva gave them her notebook. She also gave them a 34-page memo she'd written herself, organized by entity, date, and transaction amount, with source citations for every public record she'd pulled. One of the forensic accountants, a quiet man named Prescott Hale from Chicago, no relation to the contractor, had read the first 6 pages and then looked up at Neva with an expression she recognized. "You put this together yourself?" he asked. "I did. Without access to the company's internal financial systems, I don't have credentials for those." He looked back at the memo. "This is better than what most internal compliance teams produce." Neva thanked him and left them to work. Tavian found out on a Tuesday. He had been called to a board meeting. Not unusual. He attended all of them. But this one was a closed session, and when he arrived at the conference room on the 34th floor, he found not his usual board plus the CFO plus the general counsel, but instead Ottoline Ferris, two faces he didn't recognize, a woman he identified as an attorney who did not work for any firm he'd retained, and Neva. He stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Neva counted. "What is this?" he said. "Please sit down, Tavian," Ottoline said. He didn't sit down immediately. He looked at Neva. His expression moved through several things in quick succession. Confusion, then something sharper that might have been calculation, then something that Neva thought might be the beginning of understanding. He sat down. The forensic team's preliminary findings took 40 minutes to present. Neva already knew everything in them. She'd reviewed the summary the previous evening. She spent the 40 minutes watching Tavian's face instead. He was still good at controlling it. That hadn't changed. He tried twice to interrupt with alternative explanations, the first about an approved executive compensation structure she'd never been informed of, the second about a consulting arrangement with Brentwood Hale that he claimed had been verbally authorized by the CFO. Ottoline let him finish both times and then calmly asked him to produce documentation. He couldn't, because there wasn't any. When the presentation ended, the attorney Neva had never seen before stood and explained that the board was placing Tavian on administrative leave pending a full audit. His access credentials to company systems would be suspended as of the end of the meeting. He was asked not to contact any current employees about the matter. Tavian looked at the attorney. He looked at Ottoline. He looked at Neva last. "You did this," he said. "Not a question." "I brought information to the board," Neva said. "The board did what boards are supposed to do. You had no authority to." "I'm on the oversight committee," she said. "You approved the appointment yourself. 2 years ago in April." The room was very quiet. He left without saying anything else. She listened to his footsteps recede down the corridor until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she looked at Ottoline, who gave her a small, composed nod, and Neva picked up the pen in front of her and signed the audit authorization form that had been waiting on the table in front of her chair this entire time. What Neva had not told anyone yet, not Ottoline, not her attorney, not the forensic accountants, not her sister, who called twice a week and sensed something was wrong but hadn't pushed, was about the letter. The letter had come 6 weeks before Tavian dropped the asset transfer portfolio on the kitchen island. It had come in a plain cream envelope with a law firm return address in Richmond, Virginia, addressed to Neva Ashcroft personally, sent to the post office box she'd maintained since her 20s as a habit she'd never broken. She'd opened it on a Saturday morning sitting in her car in the post office parking lot, and she had read it 3 times before she drove home. The letter was from the estate of her former employer, Gordon Stanhope Kinnick III, who had died at 83 the previous November. She'd worked for him for 4 years in her late 20s, early in her career, before she met Tavian. As the director of his family foundation, he'd been difficult and meticulous and exacting and had taught her more about financial oversight than any of her graduate coursework combined. She had left on good terms when the foundation restructured, and they had exchanged Christmas cards for years afterward. She had not expected to be in his will. She was not in his will. She was in his trust. Gordon Stanhope Kinnick III had, through a structure his attorneys had maintained in trust for 11 years, designated Neva as the successor trustee and primary beneficiary of the Kinnick family investment vehicle, a private multi-asset holding structure valued, at the time of his death, at approximately $2.7 billion. The letter included, as an attachment, a handwritten note from Gordon dated 8 months before his death. "You were the only person I ever employed who caught the error before I made it. I have spent considerable time since then wondering what would happen if I gave you a real problem to solve. Consider this my answer to that question. Don't be small about it, you never were." She had sat in the parking lot for a long time after that. She had driven home. She had made dinner. She had not said anything. She had, over the following 6 weeks, met quietly with the Richmond law firm, reviewed the trust documentation with her own attorney, understood exactly what she had inherited and what obligations came with it, and made several decisions about how and when the information would become relevant to her life. It had become relevant on the day Tavian put a portfolio on the kitchen island and told her to sign it. She had called her attorney that same afternoon. Not about the portfolio, she'd already decided not to sign that. About something larger. Juno Caldwell resigned from Ashcroft Meridian 14 days after the closed board session, citing personal reasons. The CFO, Tavian's college roommate, the one who'd been at every holiday dinner, was placed on paid leave pending the audit committee's investigation into what he knew and when. The general counsel retained separate personal representation. The full audit findings, when completed, documented $6.1 million in diverted capital. The conservative estimate Neva had arrived at had been close. She was not surprised. Her attorney filed the appropriate regulatory disclosures on her behalf. The board voted unanimously to cooperate with authorities. Ottiline was named interim chairwoman while the governance committee conducted a CEO search. Ottiline called Neva on a Thursday evening, the same day the board vote was certified. "How are you doing?" Ottiline asked. "I'm fine. That's not what I asked." Neva was quiet for a moment. She was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looking at the island where Tavian had set down the portfolio 8 weeks ago. The portfolio was gone. Most of his things were gone. The house felt different now. Not emptier exactly, but more accurately sized, like a coat that fits correctly after years of wearing one that didn't. "I'm better than fine," she said. "I'm clear. Good." A pause. "The board would like to discuss a formal advisory role for you, given your work on this. There's sentiment that the Oversight Committee's charter should be expanded, and that I'll hear the proposal," Neva said. "Whatever it is, I'll need to think about it carefully. I have some other obligations coming into my life, and I want to make sure I can give everything the attention it deserves." Ottiline didn't ask what obligations. That was one of the things Neva valued most about her. "Take your time," Ottiline said. "You've earned it." The press coverage, when it came, focused on Tavian. His name, his fall, his CFO, the regulatory timeline. Neva's name appeared twice in published reports, both times only as Tavian Ashcroft's wife, as if she were set dressing, rather than the person who had assembled the evidence that brought the whole structure down. She didn't correct anyone. That wasn't the point. The point was that $6.1 million was being clawed back. The point was that the 342 employees of Ashcroft Meridian still had jobs. The point was that the shareholders had been protected, and the board had done what it was supposed to do. And the forensic accountants had told her privately that in their combined 40 years of fraud examination work, they had never seen a non-professional produce documentation that precise. She had thanked them. She had meant it. What she told almost no one, what she'd been holding quietly since the Saturday in the parking lot, reading Gordon's handwritten note 3 times in her car, was how she felt about the inheritance. Not the money, not the $2.7 billion in assets, something about the note itself, about the words, "You were the only person who caught the error before I made it." She had spent 22 years in a marriage to a man who made errors. She kept catching and correcting in silence, because that was the shape of the life she had agreed to. And she had been so long inside that shape that she had almost forgotten it had another side. Gordon had remembered. He'd been watching from outside all along. She'd cried about that, once, alone in the house, after everything was quiet, not for long, but fully, the way she allowed herself to feel things when she decided the time was right, completely and without performance, and then it was over. She opened the laptop her attorney had couriered to her the previous week, the one connected to the Kinnick Family Investment Vehicle's administrative system. She entered her credentials and looked at the dashboard for the first time. The number was there. The assets were there. The subsidiary holdings, the reporting structure, the foundation designations that Gordon had built over 40 years, the legal architecture that would now require her full attention and her best thinking for years to come. She thought about what Gordon had written. Don't be small about it. She thought about the blue composition notebook, about the 11 minutes on the kitchen floor, about the coffee she'd made for Tavian the morning. He dropped the portfolio on the island, the same dark roast from the same Baltimore habit, made out of something she'd told herself was love, but had maybe by that point been closer to momentum. She thought about what it meant to stop moving in a direction just because you had been moving that way for a long time. She closed the old chapter the way she closed every ledger, with a final entry, clean and precise, and then the book shut. Then she opened a new one.